Our last panel, we'll talk about renewable energy and transmission, the grid. We've heard a little bit about it, and now we have some the real experts. To introduce our final panel, we have the Honorable Carol Lavelle, who's a New Mexico State Senator from District 41. Carol?
Thank you very much, and it's my honor and pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. I appreciate all the efforts that went into everyone being here and everyone that had anything to do with putting this together and making it the success that it's been. I wanted to recognize a few people before I make these introductions, and I'm not sure that some of them, they came a long way to get here, and I'm not sure that some of them have not left, but several of my colleagues from the state legislature have been here today. I'd like to acknowledge them, and if any of them are here, I know that Representative Bratton and I saw Representative Tyler, but I'd like for Representative Bratton, Representative Shirley Tyler, Representative Janice Arnold Jones, Representative John Heaton, Senator Gay Kernan, and Senator Steve Fishman, if they would stand and be recognized. We appreciate you being here today, and thank you very much. Thank you. And our last panel today is made up of the following, and it's my honor to introduce them. The first will be Richard Lordan. He's Technology Director at EPRI in the power delivery and utilization sector. His current research activities focus on grid operation, planning, and renewable integration. Previously, Mr. Lordan worked at Florida Power and Light in engineering, in the Engineering Service Center operation, service, planning, and marketing. In his engineering capacity, Mr. Lordan designed overhead and underground distribution and transmission systems. Mr. Lordan holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Pennsylvania State University and a Master of Science degree in electrical engineering from Florida Atlantic University. He's a professional engineer in the state of Florida. The second panelist this afternoon will be Mr. Les Dillahunty. He's a Senior Vice President, Engineering and Regulatory Policy at the Southwest Power Pool. He's responsible for managing the regional transmission organization regulatory, planning, engineering, and contract service functions. These roles involve the communication and coordination of both technical and policy information to internal and external audiences. Prior to joining SPP, Dillahunty held many positions with Southwestern Electric Power Company, its parent company, Central and Southwest Corporation, and their merger partner, American Electric Power Company. He owns a mechanical engineering degree from Louisiana Tech University and is a registered professional engineer in Louisiana and Texas. Our third panelist is Mr. Joel Bladlow. He has over 26 years of experience in the electric utility industry in a variety of technical, managerial, and executive positions. Presently, he is the Senior Vice President for Transmission for Tri-State. He is responsible for all transmission-related function areas, including policy development, planning, maintenance, operations, and the engineering construction program. Prior to joining Tri-State, Joel worked at the Western Area Power Administration for 23 years. His education includes a BSEE 1981, BSEE 1982 from North Dakota State University. Joel is a registered professional engineer in Colorado. I'd also like to ask to join us here on the podium Gigi Dennis, the Senior Manager of Governmental Relations, Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association. She will moderate the discussion and the questions. Is Gigi with us? Either way, we're happy you're here, and we'll let you handle the questions, if you will, at the conclusion. Thank you so very much. And at this point, Richard, it's all yours. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. I didn't notice if Phil Harris is still here. Is Phil still here? He scooted out of here? Oh, okay. Well, so I'm not going to rebut what he said, but the stuff I have is very similar, but I'm going to focus more on the transmission side than the distribution side. My name is Rich Lordan. I work with EPRI, and I'm on the transmission and distribution side. If you could crank up the slides, Mike, I'd appreciate it. So next slide. Okay. And interestingly, I'm part mechanical engineer, part electrical engineer. I had the same concept of how to visualize the grid. You have to balance generation and load every instant of every day, 365 days a year. And that's part of the challenge. And you might say, well, wait a second, how do you balance it exactly every instant? People are turning on switches all the time and the system doesn't crash. How come the system doesn't crash? Well, there's rotors turning inside these generators, big, heavy rotors. And the instant you turn on a light, that becomes a load, a mechanical load on that big rotating axis, and that thing converts mechanical electricity to electrical energy instantly. And it slows it down just the smallest amount, and then accelerators come on and speed it up and throw another log on the fire, so everything stays on. But that's why it has to be in balance, and the reason I brought that up is going to be apparent later in this talk, and it's not a long talk anyway. So the life of the operator is pretty simple if you look at this balance. You got your nuclear load and you got your coal, and they're base loaded. And then you add generation, you add some fossils, some peaking units that kind of catch right above it, as Philip said, to make sure you have some balance, and also to sort of add load throughout the day. The load, if you look at the load on the system, pretty much summer load, everybody's seen the daily load curve 1,000 times. It starts out about half the daily peak, 2 or 3 in the morning, and starts working its way up, peaks at around 4 o'clock, takes a little rest around 5 o'clock, and then everybody gets home and turns on their microwaves, and you hit your daily peak, usually around 4 or 6 o'clock, and it works its way down. And so that's the general load that the operator has to sort of track. And then you have the little stuff bouncing up and down. So life is not easy, but simple. Okay, so now let's add some stuff. We always had a little bit of wind, 1% wind, no big deal. But now the wind is going up and down, and people are talking about 20% wind. When you're talking about 20% wind going up and down, and I got a video that's going to scare you to death on wind. Wind going up and down 20%, that makes the operator's job a lot tougher, because now we got the load going up and down, and we got generation going up and down. And so he's got to balance some things. Solar, that's not such a big deal. We showed that sort of tracks with load. Wind is the guy who's going to be taking most of this, and it's going to kill us. Hydro, I love hydro. We have a lot of hydro. Hydro is the big dog in renewables, but they're not building any more hydro because it's so hard to site. All the good sites have been taken. It takes 10 years to site and a lot of money. So hydro, if you're thinking renewables, hydro is the way to go. You just need to build some new mountains. So we're not getting there. Okay, so now let's complicate the world for the operator. These are just, I'd call them tools, but maybe he's looking at these as threats. But right now, we're going to call them, we're going to dress them up in a box, and we're going to give these to the operator. You got demand response, you got storage, which I call PHEVs, and you got storage, bulk energy storage. These are all things that he can do to control load. Bulk energy storage, I'm a big fan of it. If we can get this stuff down, and again, pumped hydro is the best way, but they're not making any more pumped hydro. The next best thing is compressed air. That's got a little ways to go, but we're starting to see some people building compressed air. The batteries they're pretty expensive. It's going to be a while before we have anything that's going to be able to provide any kind of serious megawatt hours of storage chemically. PHEVs is going to be the most greatest thing going. I just want to talk about PHEVs for a second. PHEVs, there's sort of 3 phases of the PHEV life. There's the one, if we had a PHEV today that came out, it would be what I would call a dumb charger. You plug it in, it's going to charge. And it's going to come in at 6 o'clock at night at the worst possible time. So when I talk about PHEV saving the world, it's not going to save anything right now. It's in the worst possible time. Now, give me a couple years and we're going to have a thing called smart charging, where the operator can charge it up when he wants it. And he's going to charge it up 2 or 3 in the morning, and life is going to be good. And as far as the grid operators I talk to, that's all they really want. They say, hey, I don't need to do smart discharging. If I can charge when I want, life will be good. And then by 2020, we're going to have smart discharging. That's the kind of stuff that people get excited about talking about. Operators don't get excited about talking about it. But you're actually going to be kind of dispatching batteries into the system all over the place. And hopefully I'll be retired by then. So I'm holding out, hopefully. Okay, so next slide, please. So again, Philip talked about, do you see that red curve? That's the daily load curve that I showed you. This happened to be one I just took any shot. This was from California ISO from a couple months ago because I just looked on the site. That's that daily load curve. There it is. Now above that, what's that green line up there? That's the available supply. That's what people are saying, hey, I'm willing, if you pay me, I'm willing to come on anytime you want. So society is paying for that. We have a load between 20 and 30 gigs in California ISO, and we got about 20 extra gigs that we're paying for, not full price, but partial price to be spinning in the background. Now, when you start adding a lot of wind, the only way to combat that wind going up and down is with more spinning reserves. So you're going to end up with even more of that, unless we can get real clever. But the answer today, when I talk about, hey, let's add some storage, or what are we going to do? They all say, hey, I'm just going to put a CT and run it at partial load and next to my wind plant, and everything's good, right? So next slide. So I want to talk about more problems with wind. Before I give you the aspirin, I want to give you a headache on wind. So bear with me for a minute. Problems with wind. Wind is not where the people are. You know, we already saw this. The blue area is where the wind is. That's where we are today. And if you drove in here, you realize there's no people live here. So this is not where the load is. There's a few. But most of the people live out in the red areas, in the coastlines, around Florida, California, but there's no wind there. So we're going to need transmission. Any solution we're going to have is going to have bulk transmission, whether it's 765 or 345 or 500. We're going to need some transmission. People say, well, and let's connect the wind, because wind doesn't go up and down, but let's connect all the wind together with a big transmission system in the middle as well, because surely if the wind is not blowing in the Panhandle, it's got to be blowing in North and South Dakota. Look at that. So let's go to the next slide. This is MISO, Midwest ISO. This is a big area. If you look in the top corner, that's like Boston, and it goes all the way down and includes Texas. So this is half the United States. This is almost the whole Eastern Interconnection. Sometimes the wind blows all over the place. Sometimes it doesn't blow at all. So when people say it's got to be blowing somewhere, it ain't true. And when they say, well, it blows somewhere most of the time, that's fine, but we got to operate the grid all the time. So, I got to deal with this area when it's all blue. All right, next slide. So this is a monthly chart. Some of you people have seen this. They track the wind output into Hatcheby Creek in California every day for a month. Now, how would you like to operate this thing? This thing is 600 megawatts at peak. Now guess what? In 5 years, it's going to be 6 gig. And California is 50 gig. So picture trying to operate this thing. When it's a little thing, it's a pain in the neck. When it starts swinging like that, it's going to kill you. And when people talk about forecasting, I'd love to hear someone tell me they can forecast outside of 24 hours. Within an hour, I can do a pretty good job. But, outside of a day, I'm really betting. There's nobody can tell me the next day. So the other thing I wanted to say, since you're changing the slides on me, is one thing you can say is it's all up and down, but when I really need it the most, can you tell me about the worst days? So go ahead, go to the next slide. These are the hottest days in California that year, the 7 hottest days, the 7 days when I need wind in the middle of the day the most. They all have something in common. No wind. So, wind is not where the people are. It's variable, it's unpredictable, and when you really need it, it's not there. Okay, everything else is aces. Next slide. Okay, so then someone says, well, wait a second, let's talk about Denmark, Rich, because Denmark, they have 20% wind, darn, they have 50% wind sometimes. Let's go. And Mike, can you turn on that? You are good. So let me show you. This is a 3-day weekend in Denmark in 2005. They're a 6-gig country, so they're smaller than California, right? But you can see if you look, let me ground you on this slide. If you look at the top graph, that shows there's 3 humps. That's their 3 daily loads. We've seen that load curve before, right? Below that is their wind output. So when we start our story, it's 4 o'clock in the morning on Friday morning. They got 4 gigs of load and 3 gigs of wind. So they're almost all wind. Everything's happy. Down below is the wind speed in the area. If you multiply by 2.2, you get miles per hour. So, and then when this story starts, I can't see it, but it's maybe around 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour. Great wind, okay? If you look at the map on the left, that's a map of Denmark, and you can see that, like, orange and red is like great wind, and then blue is not so much output, and light is no output, okay? So go ahead, you can hit go, and I'll take you through the story. So Friday's great. They got 3,000 megs. It's staying solid. They go through their Friday night peak. It goes down in the morning. All of a sudden, here it is Saturday morning. They're completely wind. They're completely wind. Everything's starting to come on Saturday morning. Life is everybody's waking up. They're getting to work. And all of a sudden, all the wind stops. So picture the operator trying to go from no generation to 5 gig in about 3 hours. And that's the life of the operator in Denmark. So, but if you look at the curve, they didn't really lose that much power. If you look, the Denmarkians were just eating their Danish happy as could be on Saturday. How come? What's their secret? It's Germany and Norway and Sweden is the secret. They have, they're 6 gig, and Germany's 100 gig, and they got a line this big that supplies power to and from. So we don't have that option because we don't have Germany that close. It's too hard to build a line. So you can go back to the slides. So we're going to have to figure out a way to eat that ourselves, okay? So next slide. So here's what we're going to have to do, is we're going to have controllable load. When they talk about demand response, the NERC has this thing called a long-term reliability assessment. They're expecting 41 gigs of demand response. And some people say, well, what's a gig? We were talking about what a meg is. A gig, if you talk about the Northeast blackout in 2003, where people were getting fired, 7 states, half of Canada was out. That was 60 gig. So we're going to have demand responses 41 gigs that you're going to be able to turn on and off. The question I'm asking is when we start to be 20% wind, you're going to be calling on that demand response all the time. And we need to have models on how is that going to respond the 4th day. The 5th day, I'm calling you to turn off your pool pump. How are you going to do it? You might say forget it. So we need to figure out how that's going to work. We need more storage. You're going to have storage. PHEVs have to come, but they can't come until it's smart charging. Okay, because that's otherwise no help. And we're going to need more transmission. And then the other thing is if you want to hit the button one more time, I don't know whether you call it electronet or whether you call it smart grid, but the communication infrastructure that's going to tie all this stuff together so this poor operator can see where the load is, can see what the wind's going to be like in 45 minutes, can see what he got. They're going to need to tie all this together for him with tools and visualization. So I can